The sun was setting over the vast Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The air was dry, carrying with it a faint scent of dust and sagebrush. Nestled far from any town or city, Karoline Leavitt's mansion stood like an island in a sea of sand and cactus. It was a strange place, both beautiful and unsettling, with its high stone walls and large glass windows that reflected the fading sunlight. To most people, it looked like the kind of home only someone incredibly rich could afford, and they wouldn't be wrong. Karoline had more money than she knew what to do with. But her wealth wasn't the only thing that made her stand out. Karoline wasn't your average millionaire. She lived alone except for occasional visits from two close friends, Linda Carter, a sharp-witted woman who used to work as a journalist, and Jack Monroe, a gruff but kind-hearted former Marine. Both were loyal to her, though neither fully understood why they kept coming back. There was something about Karoline's house, and maybe even Karoline herself, that felt off. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but every time they left, they carried with them a sense of unease, as if they'd just walked away from something they weren't supposed to see. Inside the mansion, things were even stranger. The rooms were filled with odd gadgets and machines that hummed softly, as if alive. Some looked like futuristic tools straight out of a science fiction movie, while others resembled pieces of art carved from alien metals. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, shifting colors like fireflies trapped in amber. These weren't decorations. They were part of Karoline's experiments. Years ago, she had stumbled upon something extraordinary, the wreckage of an unidentified, flying object. No one else knew about it. Not the government, not the media, not even her closest friends. What she did know was that the technology inside was unlike anything humans had ever created. Since then, she had spent countless hours studying it, piecing together fragments of knowledge until she could build her own devices. To outsiders, Karoline appeared to be nothing more than an eccentric recluse. People whispered about her late night, deliveries of strange equipment, and the way lights flickered in her windows at odd hours. Some thought she was hoarding gold or priceless artifacts. Others speculated she might be involved in illegal activities, perhaps smuggling drugs or weapons. None of these rumors were true, but they spread quickly, fueled by curiosity and fear. In a world where secrets often became legends, Karoline's name began to attract attention. Not all of it good. One such set of ears belonged to Ramon Vargas, the ruthless leader of a powerful Mexican cartel. Ramon wasn't interested in UFOs or glowing symbols. He cared only about power and profit. When word reached him about a wealthy woman living in isolation with untold riches hidden inside her fortress-like mansion, his interest was piqued. His informants described her as paranoid and secretive, which only added fuel to his greed. If she doesn't want anyone near her, Ramon reasoned, then she must have something worth protecting. He called a meeting with his top lieutenants. Gathered around a wooden table in a dimly lit room, they listened intently as Ramon outlined his plan. "We hit her tonight," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Fast and hard, take what we can carry and leave no witnesses." He didn't believe the stories about ghostly apparitions or cursed treasures. He dismissed them as nonsense meant to scare off thieves. All he saw was an opportunity, and Ramon never let opportunities slip through his fingers. As night fell, the cartel prepared for the raid. Armed with assault rifles, machetes, and crowbars, they loaded into black SUVs and drove silently across the desert. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the sand. The journey took hours, but no one complained. Everyone knew the stakes. Success meant riches beyond imagination. Failure meant death, or worse. Ramon led the group personally, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was going to be easy, he thought. A quick smash-and-grab operation. By sunrise, they'd be gone, leaving behind nothing but chaos. What Ramon didn't realize was that Karoline had been expecting trouble. For weeks, her surveillance systems had picked up signs of movement near her property line. At first, she assumed it was coyotes or stray cattle wandering too close. But when drones captured images of armed men lurking in the distance, she knew better. Whoever they were planning something big. Instead of calling the authorities, Karoline decided to handle the situation herself. After all, she had resources at her disposal that no police force could match. She activated several of her creations, ensuring they were ready for whatever came next. One device emitted a low-frequency hum, designed to disrupt electronic signals, within a mile radius. Another projected holograms so realistic they could fool even the sharpest eyes. And then there were the drones, small, silent, and deadly efficient. Each one was equipped with advanced AI capable of learning and adapting in real time. Together, they formed a network of defenses that would make any intruder regret stepping foot on her land. Back at the mansion, Karoline sat in her control room, watching multiple screens displaying live footage of the approaching convoy. Her expression remained calm, almost bored. She sipped tea from a delicate china cup, seemingly unfazed by the impending attack. To her, this was just another challenge, another puzzle to solve. The cartel might outnumber her, but they had no idea what they were walking into. As far as Karoline was concerned, the outcome was already decided. Upstairs, the mansion seemed eerily quiet. The chandeliers swayed gently in the breeze, their crystals catching the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the windows. Paintings of landscapes and abstract designs lined the walls, giving the illusion of normalcy. But beneath the surface, everything pulsed with energy. Hidden panels slid open, revealing compartments stocked with alien-inspired weaponry. Lights blinked in rhythmic patterns, signaling readiness. The mansion was alive, waiting patiently for the invaders to arrive. When the cartel finally breached the perimeter fence, they moved quickly and quietly, hoping to catch Karoline off guard. They split into teams, each assigned to search different parts of the house. Ramon stayed near the entrance, keeping an eye on his men and scanning the area for traps. So far, everything seemed too easy. The gate had been unlocked, the doors unguarded. It was almost as if Karoline wanted them to come inside, but the deeper they ventured into the mansion, the more uneasy they became. Shadows danced along the walls, though no one could explain why. Whispers echoed through empty hallways, soft and indistinct. One man swore he saw something move out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Another claimed to hear laughter, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down his spine. Ramon tried to keep his men focused, snapping at them to stay alert and stop acting like children. Still, the tension grew thicker with every step they took. It wasn't long before the first incident occurred. A group exploring the east wing stumbled upon a room filled with glowing orbs hovering in midair. Thinking they were some kind of security system, the men opened fire, only for their guns to jam simultaneously. Panic erupted as they realized they were defenseless. They fled the room, shouting warnings to the others. Word spread quickly among the cartel members, and soon everyone was on edge, jumping at every noise and shadow. Meanwhile, Karoline monitored their progress from her control room. On one screen, she watched as a trio of men argued over whether to retreat or press forward. On another, she observed a lone gunman trembling in fear after encountering one of her holograms. She smiled faintly, amused by their reactions. Humans were predictable creatures, driven by fear and greed. It was almost disappointing how easily they fell apart under pressure. Ramon, however, refused to back down. He pushed his men harder, determined to find whatever treasure Karoline supposedly guarded. He convinced himself that the strange occurrences were tricks meant to scare them away. If he could just get past them, he'd find the jackpot waiting at the end. Little did he know, the real danger hadn't even begun yet. Karoline was simply warming up, testing the limits of her creations. When she decided the time was right, she would unleash the full extent of her arsenal. And then the cartel would truly understand what they had gotten themselves into. For now, though, she leaned back in her chair, content to let the game play out. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, silent and indifferent. Inside, chaos brewed, growing stronger with each passing moment. The stage was set, the players in position. All that remained was to see how the story unfolded. The chaos inside Karoline Leavitt's mansion had reached a fever pitch. Ramon Vargas and his men were no longer functioning as a team. They were falling apart, piece by piece. The low-frequency pulse emitted by Karoline's device had taken hold of their minds, sowing seeds of distrust and paranoia. Each man began to see threats where none existed, hearing whispers that weren't real, and seeing movements in the shadows that didn't belong to anyone. The once coordinated raid had devolved into a mess of shouting matches, accusations, and outright panic. Ramon tried to keep his composure, but even he wasn't immune to the growing madness. He barked orders at his men, trying to rally them back into some semblance of order. "Focus!" he yelled, gripping one of his lieutenants by the shoulder. "We're wasting time on nothing. Stay sharp and stick together." But his words carried little weight now. His own voice sounded hollow, distant as if it belonged to someone else. The mansion seemed to swallow sound whole, muffling everything except the relentless hum of the alien tech working its dark magic. One of his men, Carlos, a wiry guy with a scar running down his cheek, was the first to crack completely. He stumbled, backward, pointing wildly at another member of the group. "You're not one of us," he screamed, his eyes wide with terror. "I saw you talking to her. You're helping her." The accused man, Miguel, raised his hands defensively, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" he shouted back. "I haven't left your side all night." Before Ramon could intervene, Carlos lunged at Miguel, tackling him to the ground. Fists flew, punches landing hard enough to draw blood. Other members of the group hesitated, unsure whether to break up the fight or join in. Some looked around nervously, convinced they were being watched, or worse, surrounded. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in like jaws ready to snap shut. Ramon grabbed Carlos by the collar and yanked him off Miguel, shoving him away. "Enough!" he roared, though his voice trembled slightly. "This is exactly what she wants, to divide us." But deep down, Ramon knew the truth. They were already divided. The mansion had done its work too well. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak of the floorboards a potential threat. Even the air smelled strange now, carrying a faint metallic tang that made their throats burn. Ramon glanced at the faces of his men, searching for any sign of clarity, but all he saw was fear. Fear of the mansion, fear of each other, and most of all, fear of whatever Karoline Leavitt truly was. Karoline watched the scene unfold from her control room, her expression calm and almost serene. She adjusted a dial on the console in front of her, intensifying the effects of the pulse. On one of the monitors, she observed Ramon pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. His body language betrayed his desperation, his need to regain control over a situation that had spiraled far beyond his understanding. It amused her, in a detached sort of way. These men thought they were predators, stalking their prey. Instead, they had walked straight into a trap, and now they were learning just how powerless they really were. She leaned back in her chair, taking another sip of tea. Her mind wandered briefly to Linda and Jack, her two closest friends. They would be worried about her by now, wondering why she hadn't contacted them. But she had sent them a message earlier, warning them to stay away. She trusted them, but this wasn't something they could help with. Besides, she didn't want them getting caught in the crossfire. This was her fight, her creation, and she intended to finish it herself. Downstairs, Ramon decided it was time to make a move. Staying put was only making things worse. They needed to find Karoline and end this before it consumed them entirely. He gathered the remnants of his team, what was left of them anyway, and led them toward the center of the mansion. The closer they got, the more distorted reality became. Hallways twisted impossibly, leading them in circles. Doors opened into rooms that shouldn't exist, filled with bizarre contraptions humming softly. Symbols glowed on the walls, shifting colors and patterns faster than their eyes could follow. It was as if the mansion itself was mocking them, playing a cruel game designed to break their spirits. Finally, they reached the grand library. The room was massive, with towering shelves lined with ancient books and glowing artifacts. In the middle of the space stood Karoline, waiting patiently as if she'd been expecting them all along. She wore a simple dress, her silver hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her posture was relaxed, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. Instead, she smiled faintly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You should have stayed away," she said softly, her voice carrying an unsettling authority. Ramon stepped forward, raising his gun and aiming it at her chest. "Where's the gold?" he demanded, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound confident. "The treasure you're hiding? Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you live." Karoline tilted her head slightly, studying him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Gold," she repeated, as if the word itself was ridiculous. "Is that what you think this is about? Poor Ramon. You have no idea what you've walked into." Ramon's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the lights flickered violently. A loud hum filled the room, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. The men covered their ears, dropping to their knees as the noise overwhelmed them. When the sound finally faded, they found themselves unable to move. An invisible force held them in place, freezing their bodies mid-motion. Only their eyes darted frantically, searching for answers they couldn't comprehend. Karoline stepped closer to Ramon, her movements graceful and unhurried. She reached out and plucked the gun from his hand as if it weighed nothing. "You came here looking for wealth," she said, her tone almost conversational. "But wealth doesn't interest me. Power does. Knowledge does. And I've spent years unlocking secrets you can't even begin to imagine." She gestured to the glowing symbols on the walls, the floating orbs projecting holograms of distant galaxies. "This isn't human technology. Not entirely, anyway. And it's not meant for people like you." Ramon struggled against the unseen force holding him, his muscles straining uselessly. What do you want from us?" He managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want anything from you," Karoline replied simply. "You brought this on yourselves. All I wanted was to be left alone. But you chose greed over caution, violence over reason. Now you'll pay the price." With that, she activated another device, a small sphere resting on a pedestal nearby. It emitted a soft glow, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. As it did, images flooded the minds of Ramon and his men. They saw visions of alternate realities, glimpses of futures that could have been, or might still come to pass. Some saw themselves dying violently, their bodies torn apart by unseen forces. Others relived their worst mistakes, forced to confront the consequences of their actions over and over again. The hallucinations were vivid, unrelenting, and utterly devastating. Ramon collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as wave after wave of torment washed over him. He saw himself standing over the bodies of his men, their lifeless eyes accusing him of betrayal. He saw his family turning away from him, disgusted by the choices he had made. He saw the cartel crumbling under his leadership, its empire reduced to ash. Each vision was worse than the last, chipping away at his sanity until he was nothing more than a trembling shell of a man. Karoline watched him silently, her expression unreadable. She had seen this reaction before, countless times during her experiments. Humans were fragile creatures, easily broken when faced with truths they couldn't handle. Still, there was a part of her that felt something. Regret? Pity? She wasn't sure. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that these men had chosen their path, and she was merely delivering the consequences. When the visions finally subsided, the room fell silent. Ramon lay on the floor, sobbing quietly, his body racked with exhaustion. His remaining men were scattered around him, equally broken. None of them moved, none of them spoke. They were defeated, not just physically, but mentally. Whatever spark of defiance they had carried with them into the mansion was gone, extinguished by forces far greater than themselves. Karoline turned and walked toward the exit, pausing briefly to glance back at the ruined figures behind her. "Tell your boss this place is off limits," she said calmly. "Next time I won't be so lenient." With that, she disappeared through the doorway, leaving the cartel members to their despair. Back in the control room, Karoline deactivated the devices one by one, restoring the mansion to its usual state of quiet elegance. The glowing symbols dimmed, the floating orbs returned to their resting places, and the hum of alien tech faded into silence. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, bathed in the pale light of dawn. For now, peace had returned to Karoline's world, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. There would always be others like Ramon, drawn by greed and curiosity. And when they came, she would be ready. As she poured herself another cup of tea, Karoline allowed herself a small smile. The night had been long, but it had also been enlightening. She had tested her creations, pushed them to their limits, and proven their effectiveness beyond any doubt. Yet there was still so much to learn, so many possibilities waiting to be explored. The sun rose slowly over the Arizona desert, its golden light spilling across the barren landscape. The mansion stood silent, its windows reflecting the morning glow like mirrors. Inside, the chaos of the previous night had settled into an eerie calm. Ramon Vargas and his men were still in the Grand Library, their bodies sprawled across the floor like discarded toys. Some lay unconscious, while others stared blankly at the ceiling, their minds shattered by the visions they had endured. None of them moved, none of them spoke. They were broken, defeated, and utterly powerless. Karoline Leavitt walked through the mansion with slow, deliberate steps. She carried a tray with a teapot and a single cup, her movements graceful and unhurried. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if the events of the night had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. In truth, she felt a flicker of satisfaction, not because she enjoyed causing pain, but because she had proven the effectiveness of her creations. These men had underestimated her, dismissed her as nothing more than a wealthy recluse. Now they knew better, or at least what remained of their minds did. She paused in the doorway of the library, observing the wreckage before her. Ramon was the only one still conscious, though barely. He sat slumped against a bookshelf, his head bowed and his hands trembling. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a man. Karoline set the tray down on a nearby table and approached him cautiously. She knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "You're still alive," she said softly, her voice carrying no hint of triumph or malice. "That's more than most people would have expected after last night." Ramon lifted his head slightly, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he let out a low groan, his body shaking with exhaustion. Karoline studied him for a moment, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the beads of sweat dotting his forehead. Whatever he had seen during the hallucinations, it had left its mark. "Why?" He finally managed to croak, his voice hoarse and strained. "Why do all this? You could have just killed us." Karoline tilted her head slightly, considering his question. "Killing you wouldn't have solved anything," she replied after a pause. "Death is easy. What I wanted was to make sure you understood. This place isn't just some treasure, vault waiting to be raided. It's a sanctuary, for me, and for the work I've dedicated my life to. People like you don't belong here." Ramon blinked slowly, processing her words. "People like me," he muttered bitterly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You think we're monsters, don't you?" "I don't care what you are," Karoline said flatly. "What matters is what you do, and what you tried to do here. Breaking in, taking what isn't yours, that's not something I can tolerate. You chose to come here knowing full well the risks. Now you'll live with the consequences." She stood up and stepped back, giving him space. "I'm letting you go," she continued. "Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I want your boss, and anyone else who might get ideas, to hear about this. Tell them exactly what happened here. Tell them how powerless you were, how easily I dismantled everything you thought you knew. Maybe then they'll think twice before sending someone else." Ramon didn't respond. He simply sat there, his shoulders slumped and his face pale. Karoline turned away, walking back to the table where she had placed the tray. She poured herself a cup of tea and took a sip, savoring the warmth as it spread through her chest. For A brief moment she allowed herself to relax, letting the tension of the night fade away, but she knew her work wasn't done yet. Outside the mansion, the desert stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft light of dawn. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush. Karoline stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply as she gazed out at the horizon. Despite the turmoil of the past hours, the world beyond her walls seemed unchanged, untouched by the madness that had unfolded inside. It was a reminder of how isolated she truly was, and how much she valued that isolation. As she stood there, her thoughts drifted to Linda Carter and Jack Monroe. They had been loyal friends, always willing to listen and offer support when she needed it. But even they didn't fully understand the depth of her experiments or the lengths she was prepared to go to protect her secrets. She wondered how they would react if they ever learned the truth, not just about the alien tech, but about the things she had done to ensure her safety. Would they still stand by her side? Or would they turn away, unable to reconcile the woman they knew with the person she had become? For now, though, she pushed those thoughts aside. Linda and Jack were safe, far from the danger that had visited her home. That was what mattered most. She trusted them enough to keep their distance when she asked, and they respected her wishes, without question. It was a rare kind of friendship, one she cherished deeply, even if she couldn't share every part of her life with them. Back inside, Karoline began the process of cleaning up. She moved methodically, resetting the devices she had used during the raid and ensuring everything was back in its proper place. The glowing symbols dimmed, the floating orbs returned to their pedestals, and the hum of alien tech faded into silence. She checked each room carefully, making sure no traces of the cartel remained. By the time she finished, the mansion looked exactly as it had before the invasion, as if nothing had happened at all. But the illusion of normalcy was fleeting. As she worked, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was only the beginning. Word of the failed raid would spread quickly, fueled by rumors and speculation. Some might dismiss it as nonsense, chalking it up to bad luck or poor planning. Others, however, would see it as a challenge, an invitation to test their own strength against hers. And when they came, she would need to be ready. She retreated to her control room, sitting down in front of the monitors that displayed footage of the mansion's interior. On one screen, she watched as Ramon struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against a bookshelf for support. His movements were sluggish, his face pale and drawn. He glanced around the room, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting another attack. When none came, he staggered toward the door, moving with the determination of a man clinging to the last shreds of his dignity. Karoline zoomed in on his face, studying his expression. There was fear there, yes, but also anger. A dangerous combination, especially in someone like Ramon. She made a mental note to keep an eye on him just in case he decided to try again. Men like him rarely accepted defeat gracefully, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. As Ramon disappeared from view, Karoline leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. She thought about the technology she had created, the machines, the illusions, the drones. Each one was a marvel in its own right, a testament to her ingenuity and perseverance. Yet she knew there was still so much more to discover, so many possibilities waiting to be explored. The alien crash site had given her a glimpse into a world far beyond human comprehension, and she was determined to unlock its secrets. Her gaze drifted to a corner of the control room where a large metal case rested. Inside was a piece of the original wreckage, a fragment of alien material that pulsed faintly with energy. It was the foundation of everything she had built, the key to her success. She had spent years studying it, piecing together fragments of knowledge until she could replicate its effects. But despite her progress, there were still gaps in her understanding, questions without answers, mysteries she couldn't solve. And that was what drove her forward, the unknown, the possibility of discovery. Every experiment, every invention, brought her closer to unraveling the truth. It was a journey with no end in sight, but she embraced it wholeheartedly. After all, what was life without challenges? Without risks, without the thrill of pushing boundaries and testing limits. By mid-morning, the mansion was quiet once again. The cartel members had fled, leaving behind only scattered weapons and torn fabric as evidence of their presence. Karoline wandered through the halls, inspecting every room to ensure nothing had been damaged. She found a few bullet holes in the walls and scorch marks on the floors, but nothing serious. Repairs would be easy enough. Erasing the memory of the raid entirely would take longer. As she passed through the grand library, she paused briefly, glancing at the spot where Ramon had collapsed. The image lingered in her mind, the way he had looked at her, equal parts hatred and despair. She didn't blame him for feeling that way. If their roles had been reversed, she might have reacted the same. But sympathy wasn't the same as regret. She had done what needed to be done, and she would do it again if necessary. Later that afternoon, Linda and Jack arrived at the mansion, their car kicking up clouds of dust as they pulled into the driveway. They had received Karoline's message earlier, warning them to stay away, but they couldn't resist checking on her once the danger had passed. They climbed out of the vehicle cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. When they saw Karoline standing on the porch, waving them over, they relaxed slightly, but not completely. "You okay?" Linda asked as she approached, her brow furrowed with concern. "We got your message, but, well, we weren't sure what to expect." "I'm fine," Karoline replied with a small smile. "Better than fine, actually. Everything's under control." The cartel's footsteps echoed through the mansion's long, shadowy hallways. Their boots clicked against the polished marble floors, breaking the eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Each step felt louder than the last, as if the house itself was amplifying the sound to unnerve them further. Ramon Vargas led the group with a mix of determination and growing unease. He had expected resistance, guards, alarms, maybe even booby traps, but this place felt wrong. It wasn't just the strange noises or the flickering lights, it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain. The mansion seemed alive, watching them, waiting. As they moved deeper into the house, the men began to notice things that made their skin crawl. One of them pointed at a painting on the wall, a simple landscape of rolling hills and a bright blue sky. At first glance, it looked normal enough, but then the clouds started moving. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, until the entire scene shifted before their eyes. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the hills in darkness. A storm rolled, in lightning flashing across the canvas. The man stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, and shouted something in Spanish. His voice cracked with fear, and the others turned to stare at him, unsure if they were seeing what he saw, or losing their minds. Ramon cursed under his breath and ordered the group to keep moving. "It's just tricks," he snapped, though his tone betrayed his doubt. "Mirrors, lights, whatever, don't let it get to you." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, he caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye. Shadows darted along the walls, too fast to be real. When he spun around to confront them, there was nothing there, just empty hallways and closed doors. The tension among the men grew unbearable. They whispered nervously to each other, their voices low and frantic. Some clutched their weapons tighter, knuckles white from the strain. Others muttered prayers under their breath, hoping for protection from forces they didn't understand. One man, a wiry guy named Diego, refused to go any farther after spotting what he swore was a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from a darkened room. "We need to leave," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "This isn't right. This isn't natural." Ramon grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. "You want to run?" he growled, his face inches away from Diego's. "Fine, go ahead. But if you do, don't come crying to me when I find you later. You'll regret it more than staying here." Diego swallowed hard and nodded, too terrified to argue. Ramon released him and turned back to the group. "Stick together," he commanded. "If we stay focused, we'll get through this." But staying focused was easier said than done. As they continued their search, the mansion seemed to twist and shift around them. playing tricks on their senses. Doors that should have led to bedrooms opened into endless corridors lined with mirrors. In one room, they found shelves stacked high with books, but when they tried to read the titles, the words blurred and rearranged themselves into nonsense. Another room appeared to be filled with treasure chests spilling over with gold coins, only for the coins to vanish into thin air when touched. The men laughed nervously at first, trying to convince themselves it was all part of some elaborate hoax. But the longer they stayed, the harder it became to deny the truth. Something unnatural was happening here. Karoline watched everything unfold from her control room, her expression calm and detached. On the monitors, she observed the cartel, members stumbling through her carefully crafted illusions, their fear growing with every passing second. She adjusted a dial on one of her machines, intensifying the effects. A faint hum filled the air, barely audible but enough to unsettle anyone who heard it. It was designed to bypass conscious thought, targeting the subconscious mind directly. To the intruders, it sounded like whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. One of the men dropped to his knees, clutching his head as if trying to block out the noise. "Make it stop," he screamed, tears streaming down his face. His companions backed away from him, unsure whether to help or flee. None of them noticed the faint glow emanating from the walls, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. Karoline leaned forward slightly, intrigued by how quickly they were unraveling. These were hardened criminals, men accustomed to violence and chaos. Yet here they were, reduced to trembling wrecks by a few clever tricks of light and sound. It was almost poetic. In another part of the mansion, a small group discovered a staircase leading downward. Hoping to escape the madness upstairs, they descended cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageway. The air grew cooler the eye. Deeper they went, carrying with it a metallic tang that made their stomachs churn. At the bottom, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber illuminated by an eerie green light. Strange symbols covered the walls, shifting and changing like liquid fire. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a sphere, about the size of a basketball. It pulsed with energy, its surface rippling like water. "What is that thing?" one of the men whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," another replied, inching closer despite his fear. "But it looks valuable." Before anyone could stop him, he reached out to touch the sphere. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the room erupted in blinding light. The men cried out, shielding their eyes as waves of heat washed over them. When the light faded, they found themselves unable to move. Their bodies were frozen in place, held immobile by an invisible force. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, completely at the mercy of whatever power controlled the sphere. Back upstairs, Ramon was starting to lose patience. His men were scattered throughout the mansion, reporting back with wild tales of ghosts and monsters. He dismissed most of it as hysteria, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something extraordinary was going on. He decided to take matters into his own hands, ordering a small team to accompany him while the rest secured the perimeter. Together, they pushed deeper into the mansion, determined to uncover its secrets. They eventually reached a large double door at the end of a hallway. Unlike the other doors they had encountered, this one was reinforced with steel and adorned with intricate carvings. Ramon hesitated for a moment, studying the symbols etched into the wood. They looked ancient, alien even, glowing faintly with an inner light. Ignoring the unease twisting in his gut, he signaled for his men to break it down. With a few powerful kicks, the door gave way, revealing a room unlike anything they had seen before. Inside, technology blended seamlessly with artistry. Glowing panels lined the walls, displaying star maps and diagrams that defied human understanding. Floating orbs hovered in midair, projecting holograms of planets and galaxies. Machines hummed softly, their purpose unknown but undeniably advanced. At the center of the room stood a console covered in buttons, switches, and screens displaying streams of data. It was clear that whoever lived here wasn't just wealthy, they were brilliant, perhaps dangerously so. "This has to be it," Ramon muttered, his eyes wide with awe. "This is what she's hiding." But as he stepped closer to the console, a loud clang reverberated through the room. Everyone froze, turning toward the source of the noise. Standing in the doorway was one of Karoline's creations, a drone-like entity, sleek and metallic, its surface reflecting no light. It hovered silently, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, without warning, the drone shot forward, faster than anyone could react. The first man went down instantly, his weapon torn from his grasp and rendered useless. The others scrambled to defend themselves, firing wildly at the machine. Bullets ricocheted off its surface harmlessly, sparking tiny bursts of light. The drone weaved between them with impossible speed, disarming each man with surgical precision. Within seconds, the entire team was defenseless, their guns scattered across the floor. Ramon backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was beyond anything he had ever encountered. From somewhere above, Karoline watched the scene unfold with mild interest. She manipulated the drone remotely, guiding its movements with practiced ease. On one of the monitors, she zoomed in on Ramon's face, noting the mixture of anger and terror etched into his features. "You should have listened to your instincts," she murmured to herself, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Now you'll learn why curiosity can be deadly." Down in the chamber with the glowing sphere, the paralyzed men began to experience something far worse than physical restraint. Images flooded their minds, visions of alternate realities where their choices led to horrifying outcomes. One man saw himself murdering his family in a fit of rage, while another relived the moment he betrayed his best friend. Only this time, the betrayal resulted in death. The hallucinations were vivid, overwhelming, leaving them gasping for breath and begging for mercy. By the time the effect wore off, they were broken, their spirits crushed. Upstairs, Ramon and his remaining men retreated to regroup, their confidence shattered. They huddled together in a corner of the mansion, whispering urgently about what to do next. Some suggested leaving immediately, while others argued they couldn't return empty-handed. The days that followed the cartel raid were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly around Karoline Leavitt's mansion, its vast emptiness a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded within her walls. The sun blazed down mercilessly during the day, while the nights grew cold and still. It was as if the land itself had absorbed the tension of the past week and now exhaled it slowly, letting the memory fade into the wind. Inside the mansion, however, life was anything but calm. Though the intruders were gone, their presence lingered like a shadow. Bullet holes marked the walls, scorch marks scarred the marble floors, and shards of broken glass glittered in corners where they hadn't yet been swept up. Karoline moved through the house with purpose, repairing what she could and replacing what she couldn't. Yet even as she worked, her mind wandered. She replayed the events of that night over and over again, not out of regret, but out of curiosity. What had she learned? What could she improve? Karoline spent hours in her control room, studying footage from the cameras that had captured every moment of the raid. She watched Ramon Vargas and his men stumble through her illusions, their fear growing with each step. She analyzed their reactions, noting which devices had worked best and which ones needed refinement. The drone-like entity had performed admirably, disarming the intruders with surgical precision. The hallucination-inducing sphere had proven particularly effective, breaking them mentally before they could recover physically. But there were gaps, moments when her defenses had faltered or failed to adapt quickly enough. Those moments fascinated her most of all. She made adjustments methodically, tweaking settings and recalibrating machines until everything hummed with renewed efficiency. Her creations weren't just tools, they were extensions of herself, reflections of her intellect and determination. Each improvement brought her closer to perfection, or at least as close as she could get. The alien tech she had reverse-engineered was advanced beyond human understanding, but that didn't stop her from trying to master it. Every experiment, every test, pushed the boundaries of what she thought possible. Outside the mansion, rumors, about the failed raid spread like wildfire. In the criminal underworld, whispers of a cursed fortress in the desert began to circulate. Some claimed the mansion was haunted, protected by spirits that drove intruders mad. Others believed it housed supernatural weapons capable of bending reality itself. Few dared to speak openly about it, afraid of attracting unwanted attention. But among those who did, one name kept coming up: Karoline Leavitt. Ramon Vargas returned. To his compound, bruised, battered, and humiliated. His failure weighed heavily on him, not just because of the loss of men and resources, but because of the shame he felt. He had underestimated Karoline, dismissed her as nothing more than an eccentric recluse. Now he knew better. The visions he had endured, the alternate realities, the endless loops of guilt and despair, had left scars deeper than any physical wound. He tried to explain what had happened to his boss, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It's not human," he muttered, pacing back and forth in frustration. "Whatever she has, it's not human." His boss, a ruthless man known only as El Jefe, listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Ramon finished, El Jefe leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You're telling me you lost half your team to ghosts?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No," Ramon snapped, shaking his head vehemently. "Not ghosts. Machines. Technology. But it wasn't ours. It was something else. Something alien." El Jefe stared at him for a long moment before leaning back in his chair. "Aliens," he repeated flatly, as if testing the word on his tongue. Then he laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent chills down Ramon's spine. "You've got balls coming back here with a story like that. Do you think I'm stupid?" "It's true," Ramon insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it. She's got something we can't fight." El Jefe's laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by a glare sharp enough to pierce steel. "Then maybe you shouldn't have gone after her in the first place," he said coldly. "Failure isn't something I tolerate, Ramon. You know that." Ramon flinched, knowing full well what came next. He had led the mission, and now he would bear the consequences. As punishment, El Jefe stripped him of his rank and banished him from the cartel. Ramon left without argument, too broken to resist. He disappeared into the shadows, vowing never to return to the mansion or to cross paths with Karoline Leavitt ever again. Back at the mansion, Linda Carter and Jack Monroe continued to visit Karoline regularly, though their visits were tinged with unease. They admired her intelligence and resourcefulness, but they couldn't ignore the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Each time they entered the mansion, they noticed new changes, strange gadgets humming softly in corners, symbols glowing faintly, on walls holograms flickering like mirages. It was as if the house itself was evolving, growing more complex with each passing day. One evening, as the three of them sat together in the living room, Linda finally voiced the question that had been weighing on her mind. "How far are you going to take this, Karoline?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. "At what point do you say enough is enough?" Karoline glanced at her, then at Jack, who nodded in agreement. She sighed softly, setting down her teacup. "Do you remember why I started this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward the walls. "Why I dedicated my life to studying that crash site?" Linda hesitated, then nodded. "You wanted answers, to understand something bigger than yourself." "Exactly," Karoline replied, "and I'm still searching. Every discovery leads to another question. Every breakthrough reveals another mystery. I can't stop, not until I've unraveled it all." "But at what cost?" Jack interjected, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You've built yourself a fortress, Karoline, a fortress filled with things most people wouldn't dare touch. What happens if someone else finds out? What happens if they decide they want it for themselves?" Karoline smiled faintly, though. There was no humor in it. "That's why I have you two," she said simply. "To remind me of the risks, to keep me grounded." She paused, glancing between them. "But I won't lie. I'm not doing this for anyone else. This is my choice, my path, and I'll follow it wherever it takes me." Linda and Jack exchanged worried glances but said nothing. They knew better than to argue with her when she spoke like that. Instead, they changed the subject, steering the conversation toward lighter topics. For a while, the tension eased, and they laughed and talked like old friends. But beneath the surface, the unease remained, a silent acknowledgement of the gulf between them. As the weeks passed, the mansion settled back into its usual rhythm. The repairs were completed, the bullet holes patched, the shattered glass replaced. Everything looked normal again, or as normal as it ever did. Yet Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that the cartel raid had changed something fundamental. It wasn't just the damage to her home or the threat of future attacks. It was the realization that her experiments had reached a new level of power. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Late one night, as the desert lay cloaked, in darkness Karoline stood on the porch, gazing out at the horizon. The stars above twinkled faintly, their light pale against the blackness. She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to the fragment of alien material locked away in her control room. It pulsed faintly with energy, a constant reminder of how much she still didn't know. Somewhere out there beyond the stars lay the answers she sought, and she was determined to find them. Behind her, the mansion hummed softly, alive with the energy of her creations. The glowing symbols shifted colors, the floating orbs projected holograms of distant galaxies, and the machines whirred with quiet efficiency. It was a symphony of technology and ingenuity, a testament to her relentless pursuit of knowledge. Yet for all its beauty and complexity, it was also a warning, a reminder of the dangers that came with playing God. Karoline turned and walked back inside, closing the door firmly behind her. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, pausing briefly, to glance at the glowing console in the corner. Its lights blinked steadily, a heartbeat of alien origin. She smiled faintly, both proud and wary of what she had created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and she would face them head-on, as she always did. For now, though, she slipped into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The mansion settled into silence, its defenses standing vigilant against the unknown. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, indifferent to the secrets hidden within its embrace. And somewhere deep within the mansion, Karoline drifted off to sleep, dreaming of stars and mysteries yet unsolved.